John Bachman now. Hello and welcome to John Bachman Now. I'm Tracy Sable in for John Bachman this afternoon, and we begin on Capitol Hill, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as lawmakers press him on the administration's foreign policy agenda. It marks the first time since the Iran war began and amid the unsteady ceasefire between Washington and Tehran. While the hearing is centered on the State Department's budget request, Iran is quickly dominating the discussion, with Democrats raising concerns about U.S. military actions and the fragile ceasefire. All right, we're going to get to our congressional correspondent now, Kilmeny Dukart. She is joining us now live outside the hearing room with the very latest. Kilmeny.
Tracy, good to be with you. Where is this all going? That's what lawmakers on the Senate Foreign Relations panel want to know from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's really testifying publicly for the first time since the beginning of the Iran war, defending the administration's position right now at a time of global instability. But the panel, of course, these questions and this testimony is happening at a time where there are two separate efforts, one in the House and one in the Senate, aimed at formally rebuking U.S. military intervention in Iran.
When I talk to my constituents, they ask for economic relief at home, not regime change in Havana or Caracas or Tehran. Instead, you sent Congress a war powers notification saying we are not in active hostilities with Iran, while the U.S. was conducting strikes against Iran and Iran was bombing U.S. embassies and bases throughout the Middle East. That was not consultation. It was an attempt to avoid answering to this committee and this Congress about this war.
Rubio opened his testimony defending the administration's actions in Iran, arguing U.S. strikes were necessary to prevent Tehran from reaching a point of strategic immunity.
What they tried to do is they were going to try to build a conventional shield and hide behind that conventional shield and basically say to the world, if you come and do anything about our nuclear program, we will overwhelm you with missiles, we will overwhelm you with drones, and we will overwhelm you with our Navy, and you will not win. You will not be able to do anything about it. They were seeking that point of immunity, which is why the president chose to act, to deny them that point of immunity.
Well, before that hearing got underway, demonstrators protesting proposed cuts to PEPFAR gathered outside of the hearing room, Capitol Police making several arrests there. This is the first of 4 hearings that we're going to be having over the next couple of days on Capitol Hill, and certainly one of the most high-profile opportunities that we're going to hear directly from Secretary Rubio about not just Iran, but also China, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Cuba. Tracy.
All right, Kilmeny Dukart on Capitol Hill for us. Great to see you, Kilmeny. Thank you. Well, the conflict between Iran, Israel, and the U.S. remains highly volatile, with Iran reportedly suspending peace talks with Washington over Israel's ongoing military operations in Lebanon and Gaza. But President Trump says negotiations are still moving forward, announcing that Israel and Hezbollah are agreeing to stop the hostilities, although fighting continued this morning. The UN expressing alarm over Israel's expanding offensive in Lebanon, warning that the violence could further destabilize the region. For the very latest on this, let's go straight to Tel Aviv, where we find our Middle East correspondent, Zach Anders, this afternoon. Zach.
Yesterday began here. Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that his forces were going to resume airstrikes in Beirut, a city of more than 2 million people. Prime Minister Netanyahu declared Hezbollah could no longer hide inside that massive capital city. The IDF warned that strikes would come if Hezbollah continued to fire into northern Israel, which they did. And then Iran threatened to launch ballistic missiles at Israel if the IDF carried out their planned attack on Beirut. Now, we were told yesterday that leaders across the region were frantically phoning back and forth, a lot of them trying to get the president on the line. The president then writing on True Social, in part, quote, "There will be no troops going to Beirut, and any troops that are on their way have already been turned back." Likewise, through highly placed representatives, I had a very good call with Hezbollah, and they agreed that all shooting will stop, that Israel will not attack them, and they will not attack Israel. Now, controversy here over exactly how that call went. It dominates the headlines in Hebrew media channels this morning. A report in Axios claims that the president demanded that Israel stop that planned attack and basically coalesce behind a total ceasefire, and that there were expletives, a lot of pointed remarks. And then sources within the prime minister's office here are telling us that they strongly deny that report today, admitting that the call was tense and that there are difference of opinions here about which way Israel wants to go versus which way the White House wants them to. But they deny it happened the way the Axios report describes. Now, today, both Israel and Lebanon are sitting down in Washington for a fresh round of direct talks, attempting to de-escalate here, but Hezbollah not at the table. The Speaker of Lebanon's parliament says that he can guarantee Hezbollah will respect a truce with Israel so long as Israel halts all attacks. And one of the key points here, and really what has been a sticking point for the Lebanese, is that Israeli bulldozers have to stop taking down structures in southern Lebanon. The Speaker of Lebanon's parliament says once that happens, that he can get Hezbollah to stop firing their drones and rockets. Live in Tel Aviv, Zach Anders, Newsmax.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Okay, we're going to bring in now President at the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He is also a U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander and National Security and Mideast expert. Dr. Jasser, great to have you on today. So Iran halting negotiations with the U.S. in response to Israel's escalating conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon. President Trump appeared friendly on Truth Social yesterday, saying that he spoke with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and representatives of Hezbollah, and both sides agreed to stop the shooting. But then there's this report by Axios saying the president dropped a 4-letter bomb on Netanyahu. Do you think there's any truth to this reporting? And also, do you see different goals between the U.S. and Israel as a potential roadblock to a longer term of peace?
Well, listen, let's make things clear. Tehran believes that they can regain leverage through proxies. And ultimately, this is the first time in over 47 years that we're at a place of strategic dominance in the Middle East over Iran. And we have the same goals as Israel. But listen, if we were, we have we have the comfort of having an over the horizon strategy for Iran. Israel is right there in the neighborhood. Over their border, they have 2,500 missiles that have been launched into Israel. So there might be a disagreement between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu on strategy, not on strategy, but on timing and on sort of how to approach the peace talks this week or in the next few days. But ultimately, we have the same goals, and you can't blame Prime Minister Netanyahu for, the Hezbollah is basically the IRGC. Make no mistake about it. And part of the negotiation, as Secretary Rubio has said, for the first time in months, even Secretary Rubio is openly acknowledging that Iran is discussing issues it previously kept off the table. So the increased kinetics happening in Lebanon, and they've lost the influence they've had with the Houthis and others in the region because the IRGC is weaker than it's ever been, and their economy is weaker than it's ever been. And Secretary Rubio made it clear that the internet coming back on is a sign that they had to get some cash flowing back to their businesses, but that's at the expense of the revolution beginning to be able to gain more steam in the coming months.
Yeah, and Netanyahu said earlier today that anyone plotting evil against Israel will fail. He was speaking at the swearing-in ceremony of the new Mossad chief in Tel Aviv, and he spoke about Iran, saying that it had already paid a heavy price, adding the foundations of the regime of terror in Iran have been cracked. It will not return to being what it was, and I tell you, its end is to fall. Dr. Jasser, how do you interpret that? What do you say to that?
Bottom line is that is the position of strength that we have to maintain, and I believe it's consistent with the American policy. And they have it locally there with Hezbollah right at their border, and it's been that way since ultimately the last decades, as Hezbollah constantly has been saying death to Israel and death to America. So they're really no different than the IRGC, but ultimately what has changed is the position of the IRGC has shifted from defiance to damage control, and they're using proxies to shift the narrative, if you will. And as they open the internet domestically, they're trying to tell their people they still have control. And what better way to do it than to put Israel on the defense? So Israel has to finish the job. Our job is to make sure they have no nuclear weapon capacity. And we see now some arrangements happening with Kazakhstan to get the nuclear material over there, which is just brilliant to have a third country do that. And ultimately, we are really not, we're less so in negotiation and more so in surrender management for them as they're continuing to try to buy time. And ultimately, as Secretary Rubio said, we're trying to open the waterways so that we can get the tankers flowing again.
Yeah, and speaking of that, focusing on the Strait of Hormuz now, CENTCOM says, I think about 121 commercial ships, they have been redirected. 5 have been disabled during this blockade against Iran. So do you think this momentum could really put pressure on Tehran?
Absolutely, because remember, the economic disaster happening within Iran. Also, as much as they are trying to shut down the Straits of Hormuz, it affects their economy too. 70% of their economy goes through the Karj Island. So at the end of the day, it's affecting them too, and they can't continue this indefinitely. We have time on our side. We have all the cards on our side. We've actually opened a pathway for our tankers to go through. President Trump met with Xi in China a few weeks ago. And for the first time in half a century, China said they would stop sending them arms and also decrease and if not stop buying oil from them, which is just an amazing shift. And by the way, the longer this goes on, the more the world is shifting its purchase mechanisms, less through the straits and more into other avenues, either through other straits and other pathways that really serve more of our interest, again, with time.